What we're about is trying to create an environment in which more resources become available in the congregation for its mission and ministry. What we're really trying to create is what we would call a culture of generosity. And that word culture is something that we don't often talk about, but which is really important for us to understand. A man named Heifetz, in his book on adaptive leadership, says that culture consists of folklore, the stories that we tell about who we are and how the congregation came to be and the important events and memories in our past. Folklore, group norms, what's okay to do, what's not okay to do, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable in the congregation. And then he talks about culture consists of folklore, group norms, rituals, the way we do things, and then what he calls meeting protocols, which I interpret to mean who gets together to make decisions about what happens in the church. But all of this really boils down to just how we think and how we act in the congregation. And many times we don't realize there's a culture that guides life in the congregation until we run headlong into it. When we meet someone who says, "Oh no, we can't do that. We just don't do things that way around here." Well, that's a revelation that the culture is something that you're encountering. Or the 7 last words of the church often reveal the culture. Those 7 last words, of course, are, "We've never done it that way before," or "We've always done it that way before." And the reason it's important for us to understand culture is because many times it's the culture of the congregation that has to change before the congregation can move closer to the vision to which God is calling them and to create that culture of generosity. Sometimes culture can act as a barrier, and it's important for us to recognize what the culture is presenting. And there's a saying that many authors quote that says that culture trumps strategy. And what that means is that we can have the best plans, we can have the best strategic plans, we can have the best tactics, we can plan the best stewardship campaigns, but if the culture is not conducive to generosity, then all those strategies and all those plans will amount to nothing. And so what we're trying to do is to help a church get back in touch with its vision and the mission. The culture really reflects 3 things. Reflects our identity, that is who we are, our purpose, what God is calling us to do and to be, and then our context. Who are the people around us? What is our community in which God has placed us and calls us to be in ministry? So it's a matter of discovering our identity. Our identity as people who are richly blessed by God. We go all the way back to the 12th chapter of Genesis, in which God comes to Abram and says, "I will bless you so that," those are very important words, "so that you will be a blessing." We really don't have the capacity to bless others through our generosity if we don't fully understand how truly blessed we are. So that's one aspect of the culture of a congregation. You may have heard it discussed as a difference between an attitude of scarcity and an attitude of abundance. An attitude of abundance says we are blessed beyond any measure that we might have imagined, beyond anything certainly that we deserve. And once we discover how blessed we are, then that leads us to a culture of generosity and awareness in which we discover that we are able to bless others through the blessings that God has given us. So that's our identity, who we are. But another element that we pay attention to is purpose. What is our purpose? And there's no better way to get at that than through regular, disciplined Bible study, because there we discover that God calls every individual Christian, not just the church, not just ordained pastors and staff members, but God calls every individual Christian to be in ministry, to serve others with the blessings that they've received. And here's the thing about that. When God calls an individual or a congregation to do anything, God always provides whatever it takes for that to be accomplished. If God calls a pastor to preach, God gives the pastor gifts to preach. If God calls an individual in the congregation to teach, God gives the gifts that enable that individual to do that. If someone has the gift of caring for others, they might be a Stephen minister or a caring minister, But in every case, God is always one step ahead of us. God is equipping us and preparing the way for the things that God wants us to do. So it's really important for a congregation to discern its God-given purpose. The purpose for the congregation does not emerge when we all get together and decide what we want to do as a congregation. The purpose comes from God, and it's realized through a process of discernment, through prayer and study, and an awareness that gradually grows that this is what God is calling us to do in this particular context. Context is important because every congregation is unique, and every congregation lives in a different setting, in a different context. It might be rural or suburban or urban. It might be multicultural. And in that context, our mission, our identity, and our purpose take on a different shape that is conducive to reaching the people in that community. So it's really important for us to discover our identity, who we are as a people called by God, blessed by God to be a blessing, to discover our purpose, to discover what God is calling us to be. Now, the mission of the United Methodist Church, of course, overall is to make disciples for the transformation of the world. But within that, within each local setting, every congregation has a vision given by God for how they're to go about that in their particular context. So we look to discover the culture of our congregation, to discover our identity, who we are, our purpose, what we're called to be and to do, and the context in which God is calling us to do that. With all those things coming together, then we have a much better opportunity to create that culture of generosity in which we truly will be a blessing to others, and that more resources will then become available within the church for all the mission and ministries with which we hope to make an impact in the community in which God has placed us. One of the things that influences culture in the congregation, and in turn is influenced by the culture of the congregation, is what's known as a life cycle of the church. Now, like every individual human being, churches have a life cycle. They're born, they grow, they mature, and many times they die. The difference between a church and a human body is that the church has the opportunity to be reborn and to begin a new life cycle. And in order to understand how that happens, we need to have some concept of what that life cycle looks like. So in the beginning, when a church is first planted or created, there's a great deal of excitement and a lot of energy and enthusiasm, all focused on the vision to reach out into the community and to bring more people into a relationship with Jesus Christ. And pretty much everything that happens is focused on accomplishing that vision. And the decisions that are made on the basis of how they will implement that vision. And if something doesn't look like it's going to help advance the vision, then it doesn't get done. We focus on those things that are most important in carrying out the vision that God has given for that congregation to reach more people in the community and bring them to a relationship with Jesus. Now, once the congregation begins to grow and more people become a part of it, then that relationship issue becomes a driving force. Because as people come in and they're part of something new and exciting, they form relationships with each other that become very valuable. And we begin to really focus on our relationships. And there's a little bit of a sense at that point that those relationships cause us to focus more inward, and we might lose a little bit of the outward focus. And as the church continues to grow and more people come in and the relationships grow, then it becomes important to have a lot of activities to engage all those people who are now a part of the church, and the focus may shift to programs. And that's at the point where a church will begin to realize, well, we may need more programs for children and for youth, and this may lead to the hiring of more staff, a director or minister for children and ministries, or maybe a full-time music or worship director. And the programs become a real focus, and at that point, many of the decisions that are made based on how they will affect the programs that are in place. And as a church continues to grow and mature, eventually some of the initial energy may wane and fall by the wayside. And when that happens, then a downward curve begins in the life cycle of the congregation. And that curve can lead to a fourth element that can be a driving force, and that element is management, or even worse, maintenance, just seeking to get the bills paid and keep the doors open. So that life cycle begins with a focus on the vision. It moves to a focus on the relationships that exist within the congregation. From there, it moves to programs and the way in which they can enrich the life of the congregation. But you see, what's happening here is that the focus is often shifting gradually and unintentionally from outward to inward. And then if that all keeps up, then that downward curve begins that can lead to the place where the church is no longer in contact with the community around it, and where the focus shifts to management or maintenance or just keeping the church alive. Now, my friend Bob Farr, who is now Bishop Bob Farr, when he was my friend, he's still my friend, but when he was director of Congregational Excellence for the Missouri Annual Conference, he used to say that he had an old Ford Mustang, and it had a very tight cockpit, not very big. And what Bob likes to say is there's only room for one driver in that car. In the life cycle of the church, there's really usually only one primary driver that is the focus of everything that happens, and that is the criteria on which many, if not most, decisions are made. And so in the early, youthful, exciting, energy-filled days of a congregation, the focus is clearly on the vision, and everything that happens is driven by the vision. And then when the church begins to mature and more people come in and they grow close and they really enjoy being together and fellowshipping with each other, then the focus really can shift to relationships. And one way to know when that is happening is when you begin to hear things like, well, maybe we shouldn't do that because this group would be upset, or this individual would be upset. And at that point, relationships are driving the congregation. And then when we get to the point where the programs have taken over, now at this point there's really a shared driver. We're trying to fit too many drivers into the seat because there can be a focus on a little bit of vision left, a lot on relationships, a lot on programs, but when the programs become the focus, then the budget creeps in, because in order to support the programs, we need lots more resources, and people begin to make decisions based around how the programs will be affected. And sometimes programs are continued on beyond the time of their usefulness and beyond the purpose for which they began, because they have become a driving force, and we can't stop because the programs are the priority. And if things continue in that vein and that downward curve begins to happen, then it can lead to death. In reality, it can certainly lead to that place where the church is, all the energy and all the resources are focused just on keeping the doors open and paying the bills. Now, here's the beautiful thing in that picture. At any point in that life cycle, it is possible for a congregation to have a fresh start, to be reborn, to start a new life cycle, a new curve all over again. But the only way that happens is when the focus returns again to the vision for the congregation. The vision that created the congregation, the vision that God has given them for making an impact in the community in which they're situated, the vision has to become again the driving force. And decisions are made based on whether or not they help that vision to become a reality. So remember, what we're about here is creating a culture of generosity in which more resources become available for the mission and ministry of the congregation. But that is really a factor of where the congregation is in its life cycle. And that becomes most possible when the focus is on the vision that is driving every decision in the congregation. So what we hope will happen in your congregations is that you will get in touch with that vision that God has given for your congregation, remembering your identity, your purpose, and the context, and Allow the vision to be the driving force in everything that you do and every decision that gets made. And in that way, the culture of blessing, the culture of generosity, has much more likelihood of becoming reality. And it's been said that a vision without resources is nothing more than a dream. But we don't want churches to just have dreams. We want visions to become reality. And the way to do that is to allow the vision to become the driving force in everything that is done and everything that results in the ministry of the congregation.